They dumped me in a retirement home like yesterday's trash. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't just angry, I was calculating. Before you hear my story of revenge and redemption, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know where my sisters in arms are gathering. Let me take you back to the day everything changed. The sky was a dull gray, heavy with unspoken betrayal. My son Matthew called that morning, his voice dripping with false concern. Mom, we're coming over to help organize some things. Help? I should have recognized the warning signs. I had just finished my morning routine, a cup of Earl Grey tea on the porch, watching the neighborhood come to life. For 38 years, I'd sat in that same wicker chair, watching seasons change, children grow, neighbors come and go. My Victorian home on Maple Street had been my sanctuary since Harold and I purchased it as newlyweds with ambitious dreams and modest savings. We'd stretched every dollar, eaten countless meals of beans and rice, and worked second jobs to afford it. When Harold died of a heart attack 12 years ago, this house became more than a home. It became my connection to him, to our life together, to every memory we'd built. I spent the morning tidying up, although the house was already immaculate. I'd always kept a clean home, a habit from my mother that I could never shake. At 71, I was still independent, still sharp, still capable, despite the occasional misplaced keys or forgotten name. Nothing unusual for my age. Certainly, nothing that warranted concern. I sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd nursed their fevers, celebrated their birthdays, and counseled them through divorces. I'd even made their favorite coffee cake, the recipe Harold's mother had passed down to me. The cinnamon and sugar topping had caramelized perfectly. I'd set out their favorite mugs, Matthew's University of Michigan cup, Diane's World's Best Lawyer mug that her daughter had given her for Christmas, and Michael's chipped blue ceramic one that he'd made in high school pottery class. I still remembered the pride in his eyes when he'd presented it to me, imperfect, but made with love. Foolish Marie still setting the table for children who were coming to clear it permanently. They arrived like executioners. Matthew entered first, all business in his pressed suit, his salt and pepper hair cut short and severe, his father's eyes avoiding mine. At 45, he'd become the spitting image of Harold, except for one crucial difference. Harold's eyes had always held warmth. Matthew's were cold, calculating. As CFO of a mid-sized company, he'd developed a habit of seeing everything as assets and liabilities. I never thought I'd become the latter in his ledger. Diane followed, clutching her designer purse like a shield. At 42, my only daughter had transformed from the sensitive girl who rescued injured birds into a corporate attorney whose emotions seemed as carefully tailored as her pantsuit. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun, not a strand out of place, much like her carefully controlled life. She'd divorced 3 years ago and had been harder, more brittle ever since, as though she'd locked away any part of herself that might be vulnerable to pain. Michael came last, holding a folder of papers I immediately distrusted. The youngest at 38, he'd always been the follower, easily influenced by his older siblings. A high school history teacher with a kind face that had once reminded me of my brother. But today, that kindness was overshadowed by a resolute determination that made my heart sink. He had 2 children of his own, my only grandchildren, who called less and less frequently as they entered their teenage years. Coffee cake, I offered, my voice steadier than I felt. It's still warm. No thanks, Mom, Matthew said, checking his watch. We have a lot to cover today. Mom, Diane began with that patronizing tone reserved for children and the elderly. We've been talking. That's how it always starts, isn't it? When they're about to destroy your world. Diane explained they'd found a wonderful community for me. Sunset Gardens. The way she described it made it sound like a resort, not the prison it would become. Private rooms with emergency call buttons, daily activities to stimulate cognitive function, professional staff available 24/7, a dining hall with nutritionally balanced meals. I'm not going anywhere, I said firmly. This is my home. Matthew cleared his throat. Mom, be reasonable. This house is too much for you to manage alone. I manage just fine, I countered. Mrs. Abernathy's grandson mows the lawn, and I have a cleaning service once a month. Michael slid the papers across the table. Mom, you've been forgetting things. We're worried about your safety. Forgetting things? I nearly laughed. I forgot to return one phone call last week. That makes me incompetent? Matthew cleared his throat. You left the stove on twice this month. Once, I corrected, and I caught it immediately. The neighbor saw you wandering in your nightgown, Diane added. I was getting the newspaper in my robe, not a nightgown. That busybody, Mrs. Keller, needs to mind her own business. My indignation bounced off them like rain on a window pane. They'd rehearsed this, I realized. They'd anticipated my objections and prepared their rebuttals. This wasn't a discussion. It was a sentencing. They'd already made up their minds. The betrayal cut deeper when Michael revealed they'd already signed me up using the power of attorney I'd granted him after my minor surgery last year, a document I'd signed, believing it was for medical emergencies only. I'd been recovering from anesthesia, groggy and trusting, when he'd presented the papers. Just in case something happens during recovery, Mom, he'd said, so we can make medical decisions if needed. I remembered signing without reading the fine print, a mistake I would never make again. We're selling the house, Matthew announced flatly. The market's hot right now. We can get top dollar. Selling my house? My voice barely worked. The house your father and I paid off 30 years ago? The house where you all grew up. It's too big for you, Diane said, not meeting my eyes. The money will help cover Sunset Gardens. And what about the rest of the money after paying for this facility? I asked. An uncomfortable silence fell. Matthew mumbled something about managing it for my future needs. That's when I realized this wasn't about my welfare. It was about my assets. My 3-bedroom Victorian in a gentrifying neighborhood had suddenly become more valuable to them than their own mother. The house where I'd bandaged skinned knees, hosted graduation parties, and welcomed new daughters-in-law was now just a commodity to be liquidated. I need to think about this, I said, my voice trembling despite my efforts to appear strong. There's nothing to think about, Mom, Matthew said, glancing at his watch again. It's already arranged. We're taking you today. Today? The room seemed to tilt. But my things, my photo, We've packed essentials, Diane interrupted. We can collect anything else you need later. But my garden, the roses I just planted. Mom, Michael said gently, the kindest of the 3, but still complicit. The new owners might keep the garden. You can have a small plant at Sunset Gardens. A small plant. As if 50 years of nurturing gardens could be reduced to a potted philodendron on a windowsill. Within 2 hours, they'd packed a single suitcase for me. 68 years of life condensed to one bag. They didn't even let me choose which photos to take. Diane selected a family portrait from 10 years ago when we'd all vacationed in Florida. Harold already gone, but the rest of us smiling under a palm tree. It was a beautiful photo, but not the one I would have chosen. I would have taken the black and white one of Harold and me on our wedding day, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he looked down at me, love radiating from every pore. As they led me out the front door, I paused to touch the doorframe where we'd marked the children's heights as they grew. Those pencil marks would probably be painted over within a week. 38 years of life in this house, and I wasn't even allowed a proper goodbye. The ride to Sunset Gardens was silent. I stared out the window, memorizing the streets of the neighborhood I'd lived in for 40 years, knowing I might never see them again. We passed Miller's Grocery, where I'd shopped every Tuesday waving to Mr. Miller, who always saved the ripest peaches for me. We drove by St. Mark's Church, where I'd attended services with Harold every Sunday, where we'd baptized our children, where we'd held his funeral. We passed the park, where I'd pushed the children on swings, where later I'd watched them play baseball and soccer, where I'd taken my grandchildren before they'd grown too old for the playground. My children chatted about trivial things, Michael's promotion, Diane's vacation plans, Matthew's new car, as if they hadn't just uprooted my entire existence, as if they weren't driving their mother to what felt like a life sentence. Sunset Gardens was a beige complex with a manufactured cheerfulness that felt like a slap in the face, bright flowers and perfectly maintained beds. A sign with an unconvincing slogan, "Where golden years truly shine," a stone path leading to double doors where my independent life would end and my supervised existence would begin. A woman in a floral uniform greeted us with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her badge read, Tiffany, activities coordinator. Mrs. Wilson, welcome to your new home. I didn't respond. Home? This sterile building with its antiseptic smell and identical doors? This wasn't home. This was storage for unwanted parents. Tiffany led us through a tour that felt like a bad timeshare presentation. The dining hall with its round tables and institutional food. The recreation room where elderly residents stared vacantly at a blaring television. The wellness center, which was really just a nurse's station with blood pressure cuffs and medication carts. My room 207 was small but private at least. A twin bed with a floral bedspread, a nightstand with a lamp, a dresser, a small bathroom with grab bars by the toilet, a window overlooking the parking lot. My prison cell, decorated in pastels. Dinner is at 5:30, Tiffany chirped. We're having meatloaf tonight. It's a resident favorite. I doubted that. I doubted anything here could be considered a favorite. My children made a show of helping me unpack, arranging my meager belongings in the dresser drawers, placing the family photo on the nightstand. Diane hung my clothes, a fraction of my wardrobe, in the small closet. Matthew set up the basic flip phone they purchased for me, programming their numbers as the only contacts. Michael placed my toiletries in the bathroom, lining them up with unnecessary precision. Well, Matthew said finally, checking his watch for the third time, we should get going. Traffic will be bad if we wait much longer. They hugged me goodbye, one by one, brief embraces that felt like formalities. Diane kissed my cheek, her expensive perfume lingering after she pulled away. We'll visit soon, she promised, a hollow assurance we both knew was a lie. Michael was the only one who seemed genuinely torn. You'll like it here, Mom, he said, as if trying to convince himself. Give it a chance. And then they were gone, leaving me alone in room 207, surrounded by beige walls and the faint sounds of a television down the hall. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like the final nail in a coffin. That first night I cried silently into my pillow, not because of the uncomfortable bed or the strange noises, but because my own children, the ones I'd sacrificed everything for, had discarded me for profit. I cried for the garden I'd never see bloom again, for the kitchen where I'd never bake another pie, for the creaky third stair that Harold had promised to fix but never did, for the home that had held my heart for nearly 4 decades. But Marie Wilson isn't one to stay down for long. It took me 2 weeks to stop being paralyzed by grief, 2 weeks of forcing down bland food in the dining hall, 2 weeks of enduring patronizing activities designed for people with far more cognitive decline than I had, 2 weeks of sleepless nights and tearful mornings. On the 15th day, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt since before they brought me here. Enough wallowing, time to observe, to plan, to act. I began to study my surroundings with new eyes. I noticed the staff, overworked, but mostly kind. The young nursing assistant, Letitia, who always took time to ask about my day. The night shift supervisor, Raj, who snuck fresh cookies to residents who couldn't sleep. The janitor, Marcus, who whistled jazz tunes as he mopped the floors. I saw the other residents, some resigned to their fate, others still fighting against the dying light. Mrs. Chin in room 210, who practiced Tai Chi every morning on the small patch of grass behind the building. Mr. Gonzalez in room 215, who read poetry aloud to anyone who would listen. The woman in room 203, whose name I didn't know yet, who cried for her husband every night. And then I met Irene. She was playing solitaire in the common room, cursing colorfully when the cards didn't fall her way. Her silver hair was cut in a stylish bob, and she wore bright red lipstick that matched her cardigan. Massive turquoise rings adorned her fingers, clicking against the cards as she slapped them down. You've got that my ungrateful children dumped me here look, she said, without looking up from her cards. I laughed, my first genuine laugh in weeks. Is it that obvious? Honey, I've seen that look in the mirror. She gestured to the chair across from her. Sit, tell me your story. And just like that, Irene pulled me into her orbit. She was 77, a retired literature professor with no filter and no patience for self-pity. Her son and daughter-in-law had moved her here after she broke her hip, selling her condo and pocketing the difference. Robert always was a greedy little shit, she said matter-of-factly. Even as a child, he'd count how many cookies his sister got, making sure he wasn't shorted. I told her about my children, about the house, about the power of attorney. With each detail, her eyes narrowed further. Bastards, she pronounced when I finished. No offense. None taken. They are bastards. She slapped the table, cackling. I like you, Marie Wilson. You still have fire in your belly. The next day, she introduced me to Eleanor, a retired accountant with a mind like a steel trap. At 75, Eleanor walked with a cane due to severe arthritis, but her brain was sharper than people half her age. She'd been at Sunset Gardens for 3 years, placed there by a niece who promptly moved across the country. The food's garbage, Eleanor told me as we picked at Ruby Chicken in the dining hall. But the company's not bad except for Walter over there. He chews with his mouth open. Then came Vivian, who'd been a civil rights lawyer before a series of small strokes affected her mobility but not her spirit. At 80, she was the oldest of our group, with coffee-colored skin lined by decades of both laughter and battles. Her daughter had moved her to Sunset Gardens when her neighborhood became unsafe, which Vivian translated as became too diverse for my racist daughter's comfort. We started meeting daily, first for meals, then for walks around the grounds, then late at night in Irene's room, where she smuggled in wine in emptied mouthwash bottles. Got it from Marcus, she explained, pouring the deep red liquid into paper cups. His wife works at the liquor store. Don't tell the nurses. They'll confiscate it faster than you can say boo. One night, after 2 glasses of mouthwash, I told them everything about the house, about the power of attorney, about the money. I described every painful detail of that gray morning when my children had appeared like vultures circling a carcass. Eleanor leaned forward. Did you sign over the deed? I shook my head. No, but they have power of attorney. For medical decisions, Eleanor clarified. Not necessarily financial ones. It depends on the document. Do you remember exactly what you signed? Vivian asked, lawyer mode activated. I tried to recall, my mind foggy with both wine and time. It was after my gallbladder surgery. I was still groggy from anesthesia. Michael brought the papers to the hospital. Vivian's eyes narrowed. Having you sign legal documents while under the influence of post-surgical drugs? That's questionable at best. Eleanor nodded. We need to see those papers and the deed to your house. How? Everything's at home, which they're probably emptying as we speak. Do you have any friends who might still have access? Irene asked. Someone they wouldn't suspect. I thought for a moment. Barbara Levinson, my best friend for 30 years. She has a key for emergencies. Call her, Vivian urged, tomorrow. That's when it started, the glimmer of rebellion, the spark of revenge in a place designed for surrender. I wasn't just going to escape this place, I was going to make my children regret ever underestimating me. The next morning, I used the community phone to call Barbara. The staff monitored calls, so I kept my request vague. Barbara, it's Marie. I need a favor. I explained I needed some personal documents. Nothing important, I lied, conscious of the aide lurking nearby. Just some photos I forgot to pack. Barbara, bless her, heard the desperation in my voice. Of course, dear. I'll bring them when I visit tomorrow. It began with that phone call. I asked her to look for my important papers, specifically the deed to my house and the exact power of attorney document I'd signed. Look in the filing cabinet in Harold's old office, I instructed. The deed should be in a manila folder labeled House Documents. The power of attorney might be there too, or it could be in the drawer of my bedside table. Michael gave me a copy to keep. Barbara called back 3 days later, using the code we'd established. She asked about a non-existent book club meeting to signal she had news. Marie, I found everything. The power of attorney is limited to healthcare decisions only, and the deed is still solely in your name. My heart raced, a surge of hope, the first I'd felt since arriving at Sunset Gardens, washed over me. Are they still living in the house? No, Barbara replied. It looks like they're preparing it for sale. There are boxes everywhere, and some furniture is already gone. Matthew was there when I stopped by, but I told him I was just picking up the novel you'd promised to lend me. Can you bring those documents to me? And don't tell anyone you're coming. The next day, Barbara smuggled in my financial portfolio, house deed, and the power of attorney document during bingo night. The staff barely glanced at her, just another visitor for another forgotten resident. In my room, my friends and I pored over the documents. Eleanor, with her accounting background, confirmed what I suspected. My children had overstepped their legal authority. They could make medical decisions for me, but they couldn't sell my house without my signature. The power of attorney document was clearly limited in scope. In small print at the bottom, it specified this document grants authority only for healthcare decisions in the event of incapacity. They're counting on you not knowing your rights, Vivian said, her lawyer's mind already formulating a plan, or being too intimidated to fight back. So, what do we do? I asked. Irene grinned wickedly. We beat them at their own game. Eleanor adjusted her glasses as she reviewed my financial statements. They haven't accessed your bank accounts yet, but they will. We need to move quickly. I have $197,000 in savings, I said, plus my monthly Social Security check and Harold's pension, enough to get out of here and start over. Eleanor nodded, but we need to secure it before they do. Our plan took shape over the next week. Each woman contributed her expertise. Eleanor helped me contact my bank to secure my accounts. Vivian reached out to her former law partner, who agreed to represent me pro bono. And Irene taught me how to act. The key, she said, is to play the role they expect. Be the docile, confused mother when they visit. Let them think they've won. And that's exactly what I did. When Diane called to check in, I was vague and agreeable. Yes, dear, everything's fine. The people are nice. No, I don't need anything. When Matthew visited once for 20 minutes, I acted slightly disoriented, asking the same questions repeatedly. What day is it again? How are the children? Did you say you were going on vacation? He left looking satisfied, even smug. Poor confused mother safely tucked away while he prepared to cash in on her home. I became the elderly mother they believed me to be. Helpless, declining, and most importantly, no threat to their plans. Meanwhile, we were building my escape. Vivian's law partner, Martin Green, confirmed that my children had no legal right to sell my house. He filed an injunction to prevent any sale and began proceedings to revoke their power of attorney. The judge was appalled when I explained the circumstances, he reported during a conference call Barbara arranged, particularly when I mentioned you were drugged on post-surgical medication when you signed the healthcare proxy. Eleanor helped me set up new bank accounts they couldn't access and transfer my funds. She also connected me with a realtor friend who could help me sell the house on my terms when the time came. Never underestimate the network of a retired accountant, she said with a wink. I did taxes for half the financial advisors in this city. Barbara became our outside contact, bringing us information and taking out documents that needed to be filed or signed. She also kept an eye on my house, reporting that a for sale sign had appeared in the yard. They've painted the living room beige, she told me, disgust evident in her voice. Beige? After you spent all that time choosing the perfect shade of blue. And through it all, I maintained my facade. I attended craft sessions and movie nights. I smiled vacantly when the staff checked on me. I became invisible in the way only elderly women can, present but unseen, heard but not listened to. 3 weeks into our plan, Martin called with news. The judge granted our motion. Your children can't sell the house, and their power of attorney has been restricted to emergency medical decisions only. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Phase 1 complete. Phase 2 was more delicate. I needed to get out of Sunset Gardens without alerting my children. If they discovered I was fighting back, they might try more drastic measures. They could petition for guardianship, Vivian warned. Claim you're incompetent and need a court-appointed guardian. It would be harder to prove, but not impossible, especially if they find doctors willing to support their claims. Then we move faster, Irene declared, before they know what hit them. Irene suggested we wait for the facility's annual family weekend, when most residents had visitors and the staff was distracted. Eleanor calculated that we'd need approximately $50,000 to execute our plan comfortably. I had nearly $200,000 in savings that my children hadn't yet accessed. We'll need first and last month's rent wherever we go, Eleanor explained, making lists in her neat accountant's handwriting, plus security deposit, furniture, transportation, and a buffer for unexpected expenses. What about you all? I asked. I can't just leave you here. The three women exchanged glances. It was Vivian who spoke. We've discussed it. We're coming with you if you'll have us. My throat tightened. All of you? Irene shrugged. This place is a dump and the company's better with you around. Besides, I've always wanted to see the desert before I die. The desert? Santa Fe? Eleanor clarified. We've been researching locations, good health care, vibrant arts community, reasonable cost of living, an excellent climate for Vivian's arthritis and my joints. Plus, Irene added with a mischievous grin, it's the last place your kids would think to look for you. The day before family weekend, I received a call from Diane. Mom, we're not going to make it this weekend. Matthew has a conference, Michael has the kids, and I've got that charity gala. I feigned disappointment while internally celebrating. Their absence made our escape easier. That Friday night, while most of the staff was preparing for the weekend activities, Barbara picked us up in her SUV. Irene, Eleanor, Vivian, and I slipped out through the service entrance, each carrying a single suitcase. No one stopped us. No one even noticed. Marcus, the janitor, held the door open as we loaded our luggage. Good luck, ladies, he whispered. We told him we were going on a weekend retreat approved by the facility. He might have suspected otherwise, but his smile suggested he approved regardless. We drove straight to the airport, where 4 one-way tickets to Santa Fe awaited us. I'd always wanted to see the desert, to feel that dry heat and witness those famous sunsets. Now I would, on my own terms. As our plane took off, I looked out the window at the city lights below. Somewhere down there, my children were going about their lives, believing they'd successfully warehoused their inconvenient mother. They had no idea what was coming. Santa Fe embraced us with warm air and endless sky. The desert spread out to the horizon, painted in shades of terracotta and sage green. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still snow-capped even in spring. The air smelled of piñon pine and sage, nothing like the antiseptic corridors of Sunset Gardens. We checked into a small adobe-style rental house I'd booked for a month, plenty of time to execute the rest of our plan. The house was simple but beautiful, with tiled floors, a small courtyard with a fountain, and enough bedrooms for each of us. Vivian and Eleanor shared the master with its walk-in shower, perfect for their mobility needs. Irene took the room with the best light for reading. I claimed the smallest room, which had a view of the mountains and reminded me of the guest room in my old house, where I'd sewn quilts for years. The morning after we arrived, I called Martin. I'm ready to sell the house. He didn't ask questions about my sudden departure from Sunset Gardens. Good lawyers know when not to inquire too deeply. I'll have the paperwork drawn up. The market's hot right now. We should get multiple offers. Next, I called my bank and formally closed all accounts my children might have knowledge of. I transferred everything to my new accounts, set up with Eleanor's help. Then I waited. It took 3 days for the storm to hit. My phone rang at 8:17 a.m. Diane's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Then Matthew called, then Michael, then all three in succession, their messages growing increasingly frantic. Mom, the nursing home called. Where are you, Mom? This isn't funny. We're worried sick. Mother, you need to call us immediately. This is dangerous behavior. I listened to each message with a calm I hadn't felt in months. Let them worry. Let them feel a fraction of the fear and helplessness they'd inflicted on me. By the 4th day, the messages turned angry. Mother, do you have any idea what you're doing? We're liable for your care. The facility is threatening to bill us directly. Mom, the police are involved now. This is ridiculous. Call us back immediately. This is exactly why you needed supervision. You're not thinking clearly. Irene listened to the messages with me, cackling at the increasingly desperate tone. Hear that panic? That's the sound of people realizing they're not in control anymore. On day 4, Martin called. Your house has 5 offers, all above asking price. The highest is $75,000 over, all cash, with a quick closing. Accept it, I said without hesitation. Your children are trying to block the sale, he warned. They're claiming you're not of sound mind. I smiled. That's why we had that neurologist evaluate me last month, isn't it? Send them the report, and remind them that interfering with a legal sale could constitute elder abuse. Martin chuckled. Already done. Matthew tried to intimidate me on the phone. I reminded him of the potential criminal penalties for misusing a healthcare power of attorney for financial gain. He hung up. 2 weeks later, my house sold for $875,000. After paying off Martin's fees and setting aside money for taxes, I had over $800,000, far more than I'd need for my plans. It was time for the final phase. I sent identical letters to each of my children. Not emails, not texts, formal letters on heavy stationery delivered by courier requiring signature confirmation. Dear Matthew, Diane, and Michael, by now you're aware that I am no longer at Sunset Gardens. What you may not know is that I have sold the family home, legally with full mental competence, as certified by Dr. Levine, report attached. I write not to explain myself, as explanations are owed to those who have shown respect. Rather, I write to inform you of consequences. The proceeds from the house sale have been placed in a trust. None of this money will ever be available to you. Instead, it will fund the Marie Wilson Foundation for Elder Autonomy, which will provide legal assistance to seniors facing family exploitation. You believed me too old to manage my affairs, too fragile to live independently, and too senile to notice your betrayal. You were wrong on all counts. I have begun a new chapter in a place where I am valued and respected. Do not attempt to contact me. Any legal challenges will be met with countersuits for attempted financial exploitation of an elder. You chose money over your mother. I choose dignity over false family ties. Marie Wilson. I included no return address, no phone number, no way for them to find me. Let them wonder, let them search, let them realize what they'd thrown away. With my newfound freedom and financial security, I rented a beautiful 2-bedroom house in Santa Fe's Arts District, adobe walls, Viga ceiling beams, a Kiva fireplace, and a walled garden where I planted roses that thrived in the desert sun. Irene moved in with me. Her snoring was terrible, but her friendship was worth it. Eleanor and Vivian found places nearby, close enough that we could walk to each other's homes for dinner or movie nights. Together, we established the foundation I'd promised in my letter. The Marie Wilson Foundation for Elder Autonomy became my revenge and my legacy, helping seniors fight back against family members who tried to strip them of their independence and assets. I hired a young lawyer named Sofia Rodriguez to run the day-to-day operations. She'd lost her grandmother to a similar situation and worked with a passion that matched my own, just 32, with a law degree from Stanford and a fierce commitment to elder justice. Sophia brought energy and expertise to the foundation. My abuela died 3 months after my uncle moved her to a nursing home, she told me during her interview. Not from illness, from heartbreak. They sold her house while she was still alive, told her it was gone, that she had nowhere else to go. I couldn't help her then, but I can help others now. I knew immediately she was the right person for the job. We started small, operating out of a converted storefront in downtown Santa Fe, a reception area, 2 offices, and a meeting room where we held support groups and consultations. The walls were painted sunshine yellow, no more beige, Irene had insisted, and decorated with local art. Plants filled every corner, bringing life and color to a space dedicated to helping those who'd been discarded. 6 months after our escape, the foundation had already helped 15 seniors regain control of their lives. We provided legal assistance, temporary housing, and emotional support. Each success story felt like a personal victory. There was Martha Jenkins, whose daughter had convinced her to sign over her farm in Iowa, promising to build her a small house on the property, a promise quickly forgotten once the deed was transferred. We helped her reclaim her land and evict the daughter who had betrayed her. There was Richard Devo, a retired literature professor whose quiet dignity masked a devastating betrayal. His nephew, assigned as his caregiver, had slowly drained his bank accounts under the guise of managing his affairs. Richard hadn't even realized what was happening until his utilities were shut off. With our legal team's help, we not only recovered the majority of his stolen funds, but successfully pressed charges. The nephew was convicted of elder financial abuse and sentenced to prison. Richard now teaches a poetry class at the community center twice a week and signs his emails with the phrase, "Justice is a stanza well placed." And then there was Louisa Montoya, a proud widow in her late 70s whose children tried to declare her legally incompetent after she refused to sell her Adobe style home in historic Santa Fe. Developers had offered a generous sum, and her children saw opportunity. But to Louisa, that house was sacred ground, every corner filled with memories of her late husband, every wall bearing the soft warmth of generations. With our help, she challenged the competency hearing, proved her capacity with medical and psychological evaluations, and revoked her children's power of attorney. Today, Louisa hosts storytelling nights in her backyard, surrounded by the glow of lanterns and the scent of mesquite. Each case strengthened my resolve. Each victory was more than a win in court. It was a restoration of dignity, of autonomy, of voice. And quietly, piece by piece, those stories began to patch the fractures in my own heart. Helping others gave my pain direction. What once felt like a collapse had become a foundation. Then, exactly 1 year to the day after my children had deposited me at Sunset Gardens, under the pretense of concern but with signatures already notarized, I received a letter. It was from Michael. Unlike my own carefully drafted correspondence to him months prior, his was handwritten on lined notebook paper. The ink was slightly smudged in places, the handwriting uneven, as if every word had taken effort, not just from the hand, but from the soul. Mom, I don't expect forgiveness. What we did was, frankly, unforgivable. For months, I tried to defend it to myself. I repeated the lie that we were protecting you, that we were doing what was best. But the truth is simpler and uglier. We wanted the money. We saw the house you and Dad built not as a home, but as equity. We looked at your life and saw numbers, inheritance, assets, legal leverage. We didn't see the woman who raised us, the one who stayed up through our fevers, who taught us to tie our shoes and spell independence. We saw someone in the way. I'm not writing to ask for a second chance or to rebuild what we broke. I know too much damage has been done. I'm writing because something happened that forced me to see clearly. Last month, a colleague told me how his mother was nearly placed into a facility against her will. He said some organization stepped in, helped her challenge it legally, and protected her home and autonomy. He called it the foundation that saved her life. When he mentioned the founder's name, your name, I froze. I thought it was a coincidence. It wasn't. You took what we did, our betrayal, and you made something good from it. You've helped people. You've protected others when we didn't protect you. You turned heartbreak into a force of purpose and light. I don't deserve to be part of that story, but I had to tell you, I see it. I see you. And I am ashamed, but also in awe, with regret and admiration, Michael. I read it 3 times, then folded it neatly and placed it beside the others. Cards from clients, thank you notes from daughters and sons, photos of reunited families. I didn't cry. But I did breathe deeply for the first time in a long time. Justice, I've learned, isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives in a letter, scribbled in pen, with no demand, just truth. I read the letter twice, then placed it in my desk drawer. Not torn up, not burned, but not answered either. Some bridges can't be rebuilt, some betrayals cut too deep. Instead, I focused on expanding the foundation. We opened a second office in Phoenix, then a third in Denver. We created a hotline for seniors in crisis and published a guide to elder rights that was distributed to senior centers nationwide. The work gave me purpose, but it was the friendships that gave me joy. Irene, Eleanor, Vivian, and I formed a family of choice, stronger than my family of birth had ever been. We traveled together, weekend trips to Taos and Albuquerque, a longer journey to the Grand Canyon, where Irene insisted on riding a mule partway down despite her arthritis. If I die, at least I'll go out with a view, she declared, ignoring our protests. We celebrated holidays together, creating new traditions to replace the ones my children had taken from me. For Thanksgiving, we hosted a dinner for seniors who had no family nearby. For Christmas, we exchanged simple gifts and sang carols around Eleanor's piano. For my birthday, they surprised me with a hot air balloon ride over the Rio Grande Valley, the sunrise painting the desert in shades of gold and pink. 2 years after my imprisonment, I was invited to speak at a national conference on elder law. As I stood at the podium looking out at hundreds of attorneys, advocates, and seniors, I felt a surge of pride. They thought I was too old to start over, I began. They were wrong. They thought I was too fragile to fight back. They were wrong about that, too. They believed I would fade away quietly, except in the narrative they'd written for me. Their greatest mistake was underestimating the power of a woman who has nothing left to lose. I shared my story not with self pity, but with purpose. I explained how common elder exploitation is, how often it comes from those closest to us, those we should be able to trust above all others. I outlined the warning signs and the legal protections available to seniors, and I emphasized the need for both systemic change and individual empowerment. The applause was thunderous. In the back of the room, I spotted a familiar face, Michael, standing alone, clapping, with tears streaming down his face. I acknowledged him with the slightest nod before continuing my speech. I didn't invite him to the reception afterward. I didn't seek him out. Some reconciliations aren't meant to be, but I did send him a copy of our latest publication, Protecting Your Independence, a guide for seniors. Inside, I wrote a single line: choose better for yourself than you chose for me. He sent flowers to the foundation office the next day. No note, just white roses, my favorite. Sophia asked if I wanted them thrown out. I considered it, then decided against it. Put them in the meeting room, I said. They'll brighten the space for the support group tomorrow. I kept my distance from Michael, but I did allow one connection to remain. Emily and Jason, my grandchildren now in college, reached out via email. After several exchanges, I agreed to meet them for lunch when they visited Santa Fe during spring break. They were adults now, 18 and 20, with their father's kind eyes, but none of his weakness. Emily was studying social work, Jason, environmental science. They sat across from me at a small cafe, nervous but determined. We didn't know what they did to you, Emily said, her voice breaking. Dad didn't tell us until after you were gone, and even then he made it sound like you needed care, not that they were after the house. We found out the truth when your foundation made the news, Jason added. We recognized your name and looked into it. I studied their faces, searching for deceit and finding only regret. Your father has tried to contact me, I acknowledged. Emily nodded. We know, he's not the same since you left. None of them are. Good, I said, surprising myself with the hardness in my voice. They should live with what they did. We're not asking you to forgive them, Jason said quickly. We just wanted you to know that not everyone in the family agrees with what they did. I softened slightly. You were children. None of this was your fault. But we want to be part of your life now, Emily said earnestly, if you'll let us. I considered them these young adults who shared my blood but not my pain. I'm not ready for regular contact, I said finally, but we can start with occasional emails, see where it goes. Their relief was palpable. We spent the rest of lunch talking about their studies, their dreams, their lives. They carefully avoided mentioning their parents, and I didn't ask. When we parted, they hugged me tightly, as if afraid I might disappear again. 3 years after my escape, our foundation had helped over 200 seniors and changed laws in 3 states. We'd been featured in national news and profiled in major magazines. The woman my children had discarded as useless had built something remarkable. Irene passed away peacefully in her sleep that winter. At her memorial service, I stood before a crowd of people whose lives she'd touched and said, Irene taught me that it's never too late to reinvent yourself, never too late to fight back, never too late to create the life you deserve. We scattered. Her ashes in the garden she'd helped me plant, among the desert roses and sage she'd loved. I placed her turquoise rings on a small shelf in my living room, alongside a photo of her laughing during our Grand Canyon trip. The house felt emptier without her sarcastic comments and midnight philosophical discussions, but her spirit remained in every room. Eleanor and Vivian remained not just my dearest friends, but the steadfast pillars that had supported me through my transformation. The kind of friendship we shared had been forged in hardship and tempered in resilience. We didn't speak every day, but we knew each other's rhythms by heart. Together we did something rare. We turned our second acts into the most meaningful chapters of our lives. We saw places we'd only admired in photographs and travel brochures during our younger years. The Grand Canyon at sunrise took our breath away, not just for its vast beauty, but because we were there together holding hot coffee in gloved hands, laughing at the chill. The beaches of Hawaii felt like silk beneath our bare feet. In Vermont, the fiery palette of autumn leaves made us weep with gratitude. We weren't just surviving, we were thriving. Eleanor's arthritis worsened over time. Eventually, she needed a wheelchair for longer outings. But her mind remained whip sharp, her dry humor and unwavering focus continuing to anchor the foundation's finances. She monitored every grant, every dollar, making sure that our mission didn't stray. Her spreadsheets, she often joked, were her love letters to accountability. Vivian, with her silver streaked curls and steady voice, became the foundation's heart. As community outreach coordinator, she was the first voice many struggling seniors heard, calm, patient, full of compassion. She visited homes, made difficult phone calls, and stood beside women in courtrooms, reminding them, "You are not alone. You matter." On my 72nd birthday, I returned home from a long day at the center to find a small package waiting on my doorstep. The handwriting on the label made my heart skip. It was from Diane. Inside was a velvet box, worn at the edges, and a note written in a familiar slanted script. "These belong with you. I'm sorry for everything." Inside the box, my mother's pearl necklace, the one I'd been forced to leave behind in my hasty, heartbroken departure. I held the cool strands in my hands, each bead a memory. I didn't cry. I simply closed my eyes and placed them around my neck. That night, I wore the pearls as I stood on stage at the National Elder Rights Coalition's annual gala. They shimmered under the lights as I accepted the Lifetime Achievement Award. The applause echoed through the hall, but it was the weight of those pearls, of legacy, of lineage, of loss, that grounded me. I looked out over a sea of faces, most older, some younger, all nodding and understanding as I began. "When my children placed me in that facility," I said, voice steady, "they believed they were writing the final chapter of my story. What they didn't realize was that they were merely setting the stage for my greatest triumph. They thought they were burying me." I paused. "But they didn't know I was a seed." The room stood in ovation for nearly 5 minutes. People hugged me afterward. Some cried. Others pressed thank you notes into my hands. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like someone whose story had been written for her. I felt like the author. And the revenge I once imagined, sharp, immediate, satisfying, had evolved. It was no longer about justice for me alone. It had become something greater, a legacy built on empowerment, healing, and truth, a force that would ripple forward long after I was gone. 4 years after my children's betrayal, the phone rang on a quiet afternoon. It was Emily. Her voice was subdued, almost uncertain. "Grandma, Dad had a stroke. He's in the hospital. He's asking for you. I understand if you don't want to come." I sat with her words, staring at the sunlight falling across the table. I remembered Matt as a boy, as a teen, as a man who stopped calling. I remembered the file folder with forged signatures, the dinner conversations I'd overheard but never interrupted, the years of silence. I didn't go to the hospital. I couldn't. The wound was no longer raw, but it was deep. Still, I sent a card. Short, honest. "I hope you recover fully and use your second chance wisely." It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't cruelty either. It was the clearest, most compassionate thing I could offer. He survived. Impaired. Slower. Emily said the experience had changed him. He retired from his job, began volunteering at a shelter, started going to therapy. I didn't need to believe in his redemption. I didn't need to witness it. But I was glad for Emily that the father she had now was trying to be better than the one she remembered. And that, I suppose, was enough. Diane never reached out beyond sending the pearls. From what Emily told me, she had doubled down on her career, becoming a senior partner at her law firm and rarely visiting her brothers or their children. The gulf between us remained vast and unbridgeable, which suited me fine. 5 years after Sunset Gardens, I published a memoir titled Second Blooming. It detailed not just my children's betrayal, but the journey that followed, the foundation, the friendships, the reclaiming of my power. The book became a bestseller, particularly among women over 60 who saw themselves in my story. The publicity tour took me across the country, from bookstores to television studios. People magazine did a feature. NPR interviewed me for nearly an hour. Seniors brought copies for me to sign, often with tears in their eyes, as they shared their own stories of dismissal and disrespect. You gave me courage, one woman in Chicago told me, her hands trembling as she clutched my book. I stood up to my son last week when he suggested selling my house, told him I'd read about a woman named Marie Wilson, and I wasn't going down without a fight. Those moments made every painful memory worthwhile. Today, the Marie Wilson Foundation operates in 12 states. We've helped over 1,000 seniors reclaim their autonomy and dignity. We've changed laws and changed lives. As for me, I still live in Santa Fe in a beautiful home with a garden where I grow the most magnificent roses. I have friends who love me, work that fulfills me, and a life richer than I ever imagined possible. Eleanor, whom I'd met in those dark days at Sunset Gardens, passed away last spring, leaving behind a legacy of financial systems that ensure the foundation will continue helping seniors long after we're all gone. Vivian still joins me for tea every Sunday, her mind still sharp, though her body has slowed. Emily and Jason visit 3 times a year. They've become adults, I'm proud to know, both working in fields that help others. We never discuss their parents during these visits, an unspoken agreement that keeps peace between us. Sometimes, when the desert sun sets in a blaze of orange and purple, I think about the house my children took from me. I think about the life they thought they were ending. And I smile because their greatest act of cruelty became my greatest opportunity for rebirth. At 76, I'm not the same woman who was dumped at Sunset Gardens 5 years ago. I'm stronger, wiser, and infinitely more at peace. I've learned that family isn't always blood, that it's never too late to start over, and that the best revenge isn't violence or hatred. It's living well and helping others do the same. They put me in a home to free up the house, so I sold it and built an empire that will stand long after they're forgotten. They said I was too old to change my life, so I transformed not just my own life, but the lives of countless others. They thought they were writing my final chapter. Instead, they inadvertently gave me the opening line of my most powerful story. And that, my friends, is how you turn betrayal into triumph. That's how you reclaim your power when the world thinks you're past your prime. That's how you prove that it's never, never too late to start again. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters, your life matters, and no one has the right to tell you otherwise.